The diamond bracelet snagged on her cheap polyester apron, a 5-carat insult to a life lived on minimum wage. Clara adjusted the strap, her fingers calloused from hauling bus tubs, and navigated the treacherous landscape of egos and entitlement that was the Airy restaurant. Tonight, however, the air was thicker, charged with the kind of power that didn't just buy silence, but owned it, a power that would soon mistake her for just another disposable part of the scenery. It was a mistake that would cost a titan his throne. Part 1. The View from the Bottom. Clara Hayes believed you could learn more about the world from a dirty plate than a clean textbook. At 21, she was a ghost in the machine of New York's elite, a silent observer gliding between tables where fortunes were made and morals were mortgaged. The Airy, perched 60 floors above Central Park, was her laboratory. The patrons were her specimens. She saw the tremor in the hand of the hedge fund manager before the market crashed, the desperate lipstick smudge on the collar of the politician before the scandal broke. She saw everything, because nobody ever saw her. Her life was a study in contrast. By day, she was buried in the university's engineering library, her mind wrestling with fluid dynamics and material science, her thesis on hyper-efficient water filtration systems, a mess of equations and dreams. By night, she served $500 steaks to men who wouldn't know a jewel from a jewel, using her earnings to pay down the mountain of student debt that was her inheritance from a father who believed in education and a mother who believed in bad luck. In her locker, tucked behind her worn-out sneakers, was a dog-eared copy of Thermodynamics, an engineering approach. She'd read a chapter on her break, the precise laws of entropy, a comforting counterpoint to the chaotic excess of the dining room. Clara, table 7 needs more of that Japanese water that costs more than my rent, Marco, the floor manager, hissed as she passed. And smile, you look like you're calculating the structural integrity of the building. She was, in fact, mentally calculating the energy required to desalinate the very water she was about to serve. But she produced the practiced, pleasant smile that was part of the uniform. On it, Marco. Tonight was different. The entire rooftop terrace had been booked for a private event hosted by Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Thorne Industries. Thorne was a relic, a third-generation industrialist whose empire was built on chemicals, plastics, and a cheerful disregard for the Environmental Protection Agency. He was old money, the kind that was so secure it had curdled into arrogance. His face, a roadmap of expensive cigars and boardroom battles, was plastered across business magazines. Clara knew his company's profile intimately. Their chemical runoff was the subject of 3 case studies in her environmental engineering textbook. They were the dragons she dreamed of slaying with science. The guest list was a who's who of the city's power brokers. Among them, a newer, more dangerous kind of predator, Julian Croft. Croft was a tech billionaire, a self-made titan who'd built his empire, Omnigen, on disruptive technologies. He was lean, sharp, and perpetually restless, his eyes scanning every room as if looking for an inefficiency to exploit. He and Thorne were circling each other in a multi-billion-dollar dance of corporate warfare, with Croft's clean tech innovations threatening to make Thorne's entire business model obsolete. Clara was assigned to the terrace. The air, thin and cool at this altitude, smelled of night-blooming jasmine and Thorne's cologne. She moved through the crowd, a phantom refilling glasses of champagne that cost more per bottle than her monthly tuition payment. She listened. The regulations are a joke, Thorne was booming to a circle of sycophants. We just moved the discharge pipe 100 yards downstream. By the time their inspectors test the water, the contaminants are so diluted, they're within acceptable limits. It's a game of numbers. His cronies laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Clara's hand tightened on her tray. The river they were discussing, the Hudson, was the focus of her thesis. She knew precisely what contaminants he was talking about. Carcinogenic polymers that didn't just dilute, but settled into the riverbed, poisoning the ecosystem for decades. The acceptable limits were a lie bought and paid for by lobbyists. She made her way to a quiet corner near the infinity pool, which glittered like a slice of fallen sky, its edge blurring into the city's electric constellation. She needed a moment to let the hot wave of anger pass. It was one thing to read about corporate malfeasance in a textbook. It was another to hear it bragged about over canapes. Julian Croft stood alone nearby, nursing a glass of whiskey. He wasn't participating in the backslapping camaraderie. He was watching, his gaze analytical, cold. His eyes met Clara's for a fleeting second. There was no recognition, no acknowledgement. To him, she was just a fixture, part of the service. But she saw the flicker of distaste in his expression as he listened to Thorne's boast. He was a shark, but perhaps a shark with a different code. Her observations were cut short by the arrival of Thorne and his entourage, who had migrated toward the pool. They were loud, drunk, and buoyed by the invincibility of their wealth. "Look at this one of the men slurred, gesturing at Clara. "Working so hard. You think she even knows what year this wine is?" Clara kept her expression neutral, her gaze fixed on the skyline. Don't engage. Be invisible. That was the rule. But Marcus Thorne was a man who demanded an audience. He stepped directly into her path, his bulk blocking her escape. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice slick with condescension. "Clara, sir," she said, her voice even. "Clara," he repeated, savoring the name. "You hear that, boys? Clara. Tell me, Clara, do you enjoy serving your betters? Is it a thrill to get this close to real success?" The men chuckled. Clara felt 100 pairs of eyes on her. The quiet dignity she clung to was being systematically dismantled for sport. She lifted her chin slightly. "I enjoy earning an honest living, Mr. Thorne." The simple, direct honesty of her reply seemed to enrage him. It was a rejection of the game he was playing. He expected fear, or fawning, not simple, unadorned self-respect. "An honest living," he sneered. "You people talk about honesty because you have nothing else. No ambition, no legacy, just aprons and trays." He took a step closer, deliberately invading her space. "You see this pool? It cost more to install than you'll make in your entire life. It's a monument to the fact that people like me build the world, and people like you just clean it." His words struck a nerve deeper than he could ever know. "I don't want to clean it," she thought, a furious voice rising inside her. "I want to fix it." Perhaps a flicker of that defiance showed in her eyes. Perhaps he was simply looking for a final, cruel flourish to cap off his performance. His face, flushed with alcohol and power, twisted into a malicious grin. "You know what? I think you need to cool off," he said, and with a sudden, violent shove, Marcus Thorne pushed her. The world tilted. The glittering skyline spun. The gasps of the crowd seemed to come from a great distance. Her cheap apron offered no resistance as her body flew backward, over the edge of the infinity pool. The shock of the cold water was like a physical blow, stealing her breath. She sank, the weight of her uniform pulling her down into the silent, illuminated blue. When she broke the surface, gasping, the party was frozen in a tableau. Thorne stood at the edge, adjusting his tuxedo cuffs with a look of savage satisfaction. His friends were laughing. Dozens of phones were out, their small lenses capturing her humiliation. Across the terrace, Julian Croft watched, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He didn't move to help. He just watched. Clara paddled to the side, her hair plastered to her face, chlorinated water stinging her eyes. She hauled herself out, dripping, shivering, the cheap black fabric of her uniform clinging to her like a second skin. She stood there for a moment, the cold seeping into her bones. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She locked eyes with Marcus Thorne, and in that moment, the ghost in the machine became a predator. She held his gaze, letting him see the cold, calculating fury she felt. Then without a word, she turned and walked, squelching, through the stunned crowd and out the door, leaving a trail of chlorinated water on the marble floor like a promise. She didn't know that Julian Croft's eyes followed her every step, his analytical gaze noting not the humiliation, but the unbroken steel in her spine. Part 2, The Crucible of Dawn. The walk of shame from the Eyrie was a trial by 1,000 stares. The doorman averted his eyes. A cab driver slowed, then sped up, unwilling to let a soaking wet girl ruin his upholstery. Clara walked 20 blocks in the cool Manhattan night, the city lights blurring through her shivering haze. The cold was nothing compared to the fire in her gut. Humiliation was a powerful crucible. It burned away fear, leaving behind only pure, hard resolve. By the time she reached her tiny apartment in Washington Heights, she wasn't just dripping. She was formulating a plan. She stripped off the sodden uniform and threw it in the trash. It was a skin she would never wear again. She stood under a scalding shower until her teeth stopped chattering, the steam filling the small bathroom like a cloud. As the water sluiced over her, she wasn't washing away the chlorine and the shame. She was sharpening her thoughts. Thorne's words echoed in her head. People like me build the world, and people like you just clean it. He had no idea who he was talking to. For the next 8 hours, fueled by black coffee and righteous fury, Clara worked. Her small desk, usually cluttered with textbooks, became a war room. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was Clara Hayes, top of her class in environmental engineering, a researcher who had spent the last 2 years modeling the exact vulnerabilities of companies like Thorne Industries. She pulled up her thesis, Hyperadsorbent Graphene Filtration, a paradigm shift in industrial wastewater treatment. It wasn't just a theory, it was a blueprint, a detailed, cost-effective, scalable system that could render Thorne's entire chemical processing method obsolete. Her system didn't just dilute pollutants, it captured them at the source, turning hazardous waste into inert, manageable materials. It was cleaner, more efficient, and in the long run, drastically cheaper than the endless cycle of fines and legal settlements Thorne Industries treated as a business expense. She worked with a feverish intensity, cross-referencing her research with Thorne Industries' public financial records, their SEC filings, their known EPA violations. She mapped out their supply chains, their distribution networks, their key personnel. She knew their weaknesses because she had studied them as an academic adversary. Now she was preparing for a corporate decapitation strike. She created a new document, a 40-page business proposal. It was audacious, brilliant, and ruthless. It detailed not only her filtration technology, but also a comprehensive strategy to bankrupt Thorne Industries within 18 months. The plan involved filing for patents that would box Thorne out of future innovation, launching a targeted media campaign to expose his environmental crimes, using the very information he'd bragged about, and partnering with a powerful industry player to build a new, sustainable manufacturing paradigm from the ground up. There was only one name on her list for that partner, Julian Croft. He was the other apex predator in that rooftop jungle. He had the capital, the infrastructure, and the motive. He saw Thorne as a dinosaur, and Croft's entire business model was built on manufacturing asteroids. She was about to hand him the perfect, targeted meteor. As the sun rose, casting a pale pink light over the city, Clara printed the proposal, her cheap inkjet printer groaning in protest. She bound it in a simple, professional black cover. Then she showered again, washing away the last traces of the night's ordeal. She put on her only piece of interview clothing, a simple, well-fitting, gray sheath dress, and a pair of low heels she'd bought for a scholarship interview. Her hair, still damp, was pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense bun. She looked in the mirror. The tired, observant waitress was gone. In her place was a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. She found the address for Omnigen Tower easily enough, but she knew Croft wouldn't be there. A man like that operated from a higher perch. A little more digging through society pages and architectural journals gave her what she needed: the address of his private residence, a tri-level penthouse on Park Avenue, known as the Observatory. She took the subway downtown, the bound proposal held tightly in her hands. It felt heavier than a textbook. It felt like a weapon. The doorman at the observatory was a fortress in a crisp uniform. He looked at Clara, at her simple dress and determined face, and his expression was one of polite, impenetrable dismissal. "May I help you?" he asked, his tone implying he very much doubted it. "I'm here to see Mr. Croft," Clara said, her voice clear and steady. "My name is Clara Hayes. Is he expecting you?" "No," she admitted, "but he will want to see me. Please tell him the waitress from the area is here to discuss a paradigm shift." The doorman's eyebrow twitched. He had clearly heard about the incident at the Airy. News in his world traveled on whispers and champagne bubbles. He saw the fire in her eyes, the utter lack of supplication. This wasn't a victim looking for a handout. This was something else. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke into a discreet microphone on his lapel. "Sir, there is a..." Ms. Clara Hayes here to see you. She says you'll know who she is." There was a long pause. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her posture straight, her gaze fixed. The doorman listened, his expression shifting from skepticism to surprise. "Send her up," a voice crackled through the earpiece. He gestured toward the private elevator. "The penthouse, miss." As the elevator ascended in unnerving silence, Clara took a deep breath. The doors opened directly into a vast, minimalist space. Walls of glass offered a 360-degree view of the city, a panorama of power that made the Aries Terrace look like a balcony. Julian Croft stood by the window, a cup of coffee in his hand. He was dressed in a simple black t-shirt and gray trousers, looking more like a programmer than a billionaire. He turned, his eyes analytical, appraising. There was no pity in his gaze, only a sharp, challenging curiosity. "Paradigm shift?" he said, his voice a low baritone. "That's a bold choice of words for someone who was swimming in a tuxedo party 12 hours ago. I'm listening. You have 5 minutes." Clara walked forward, her heels clicking softly on the polished concrete floor. She placed the black-bound proposal on a massive marble table between them. "Mr. Thorne was right about one thing, Mr. Croft," she began, her voice ringing with newfound confidence in the silent room. "People like him built the world we live in. What he doesn't understand is that it's poorly designed, and I'm here to offer you the schematics for a better one." Part 3. The Architect and the Titan. Julian Croft did not invite her to sit. He remained standing, a predator assessing an unknown creature that had wandered into his territory. He circled the marble table, his eyes never leaving her face, searching for weakness, for the telltale signs of a grifter or a hysteric. He found neither. What he saw was a chilling, focused calm. "Schematics?" he repeated, picking up the proposal. He flicked it with his thumb, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "This looks like a college thesis. Your 5 minutes are ticking." "It started as one," Clara said, refusing to be intimidated. "Now it's your key to dismantling your biggest competitor and cornering the market on the next generation of industrial manufacturing. It's a plan to make Thorne Industries not just obsolete, but a historical footnote." A flicker of something, not quite amusement, but a grudging interest, crossed his features. He opened the proposal to a random page. His eyes, accustomed to scanning complex code and dense legal documents, moved with startling speed. Clara saw the exact moment his feigned indifference dissolved. He'd landed on page 17, a detailed chemical diagram of her hyperadsorbent graphene mesh, next to a projected cost analysis that promised a 40% reduction in overhead for any company currently reliant on chemical solvents. He flipped back to the beginning and started reading in earnest, his initial 5-minute offer forgotten. He was utterly still, his focus so intense it seemed to suck the air out of the room. Clara waited, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture unwavering. She had built the engine. Now she needed to see if the pilot was capable of flying it. 10 minutes passed. 20. He read the entire 40 pages without a word, his expression unreadable. Finally, he closed the cover and placed it back on the table with a soft, definitive thud. He looked at her, and for the first time he truly saw her, not as a waitress, not as a victim, but as a potential asset, or a threat. "This is not the work of a waitress," he stated, the words flat and hard. "I'm a final-year environmental engineering student at Columbia," she replied. "Top of my class. The waitressing pays the bills. It also provides an unparalleled opportunity for industrial espionage, if you're willing to listen." He leaned against the table, crossing his arms. The skepticism returned, but now it was layered with calculation. "Espionage? You overheard a drunk billionaire bragging. That's not a corporate strategy. It's a confirmation of data I already had," she countered smoothly. His cavalier attitude about dumping confirmed that his company has no internal contingency for the stricter EPA regulations coming into effect fourth quarter. "I've modeled the financial impact. The fines alone will cripple his profit margins. He thinks he can lobby his way out of it. He's wrong. This isn't Washington of the 1980s. Public perception is a commodity now, and Mr. Thorne's portfolio is about to collapse." Croft's gaze sharpened. "You know about the new regulations. They haven't been made public yet." I have a research grant that gives me access to preliminary federal registry dockets, Clara said. A small, carefully calculated lie of omission. She'd actually gotten the information from a Harry Jr. staffer at a senator's office, trading an hour of free calculus tutoring for a peek at his briefing notes. The point is, Thorne is a sinking ship. My proposal gives you the means to not just watch it sink, but to salvage the cargo and build a fleet of your own. He walked to the window, staring down at the city below. Why me? Why not take this to a venture capital firm? Why not publish it and become an academic star? Because VCs are slow and academia is toothless, Clara said, her voice laced with the impatience of youth. I don't want to write papers about the problem, Mr. Croft. I want to solve it, and I want the man who pushed me into a pool for sport to pay for the privilege of watching me do it. You have the infrastructure, the capital, and more importantly, the enmity for Marcus Thorne to make this happen. Fast. This isn't just business for you either. She was taking a risk now, moving from facts to intuition. I've read about you, she continued, pressing her advantage. You grew up in Glen Lyon, Pennsylvania, a coal town. Your father died of black lung, and the river your family used to fish in was declared a toxic site in 1999 because of industrial runoff from a chemical plant. A plant that was, until you bankrupted it with a hostile takeover, a subsidiary of Thorne Industries. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Julian Croft turned from the window, and for the first time the mask was gone. In his eyes, she saw the ghost of a boy from a dying town, a flicker of cold, hard rage that had been honed over decades into a formidable weapon. He had made his fortune in the clean, sterile world of code, but his origins were in the dirt and grime of old industry. You've done your homework, he said, his voice dangerously soft. Revenge is a powerful motivator, Mr. Croft, Clara replied, but it makes for a poor business plan. My plan is sound. The personal satisfaction is just a bonus dividend. He gestured to a chair. Sit. It was the first real concession. She sat, her back straight, her proposal on the table between them, like a signed treaty. Let's talk specifics, he said, pulling up a chair opposite her. Patents. Your IP is unprotected. The moment we file, Thorne's lawyers will tear it apart. Claim you stole trade secrets. He thinks I'm a waitress, Clara said. He won't see it coming from me. By the time he realizes I'm a threat, we'll have provisional patents filed in 3 countries. Furthermore, my methodology is fundamentally different from anything Thorne has in their R&D pipeline. It's based on biotech principles they've dismissed as academically interesting but commercially non-viable. I have the lab notes from every single experiment for the last 2 years. The paper trail is clean. For the next 3 hours, they didn't talk about what happened at the Airy. They talked about flow rates, material stress tolerances, supply chain logistics, and market penetration strategies. It wasn't a billionaire consoling a victim. It was a titan of industry recognizing a fellow architect. Clara met every one of his probing, skeptical questions with precise data and confident projections. She was not asking for a job. She was dictating the terms of a partnership. Finally, he stood up and walked back to the window. The morning sun was now high in the sky, glinting off the glass and steel of the city. I'll have my legal team vet this, he said. They'll tear it to shreds, look for every hole. If it holds up, I'll fund a pilot project, a new subsidiary under Omnigen. We'll call it Helios Dynamics. He glanced back at her. You won't be CEO, not yet. You'll be Chief Technology Officer. You'll have a lab, a team, and an unlimited budget. But you will answer to me. And if you fail, if this turns out to be nothing more than a student's pipe dream, I will personally escort you out of the building. Are those terms acceptable? Clara stood, a slow smile spreading across her face. It was more than she had dared to hope for. It was everything. Perfectly acceptable, Mr. Croft, she said. Call me Julian, he said, extending a hand. Welcome to Helios Dynamics, Ms. Hayes. She shook his hand. His grip was firm, his palm calloused from years spent in a boxing gym, not a boardroom. It was the grip of a fighter. As she turned to leave, he stopped her. One more thing, Clara, he said, his voice back to its usual cool monotone. About last night. Thorne is a troglodyte, But this world is full of them. What you did, walking away like that, without a word, that showed more strength than shoving him back. Don't ever lose that. Anger is a tool. Hysteria is a liability. It was the closest he would ever come to an apology for not intervening. It was also a warning. She was in the big leagues now. The sharks were bigger, and the water was much, much deeper. I have no intention of losing Julian, she said. She walked to the elevator, her head held high. The doors closed, and as she descended, she saw her reflection in the polished steel. She was the same person who had entered the elevator an hour ago, and yet she was completely different. The girl who served champagne was gone forever. In her place was the woman who was about to poison the well of a king. To part 4, the ripple effect. The first tremor hit Marcus Thorne not with a bang, but with a ping. It was an alert from his brokerage firm at 9:31 a.m., just 1 minute after the market opened. Thorne Industries stock, ATHRN, was down 3%. He dismissed it. A market fluctuation, probably some algorithmic trading nonsense. He was sitting in his cavernous office, nursing a monstrous hangover and a simmering resentment. The memory of the waitress, her defiant eyes, her silent, dignified exit, was an irritating burr under his skin. He'd spent the morning fielding calls from his board, all of them variations on a theme: damage control. A video of the pool incident, shaky and poorly lit, had surfaced on social media. It was gaining traction. Trasha pool thug and concert area assault were trending. Just a misunderstanding, Thorne had blustered to his PR chief. The girl tripped. I was trying to catch her. We'll release a statement. Make a donation to a charity for underprivileged women or something. But the story was already spiraling. The Airy had issued a statement permanently banning him from the premises and formally apologizing to their employee. The Children's Education Foundation, the charity that hosted the gala, announced they were returning his donation. Small cracks were appearing in the fortress of his reputation. He still wasn't worried. Reputations could be rebuilt. Money was the great eraser. The real earthquake began at 11 a.m. It arrived in the form of a press release from Omnigen, Julian Croft's corporate behemoth. Omnigen announces launch of Helios Dynamics, a revolutionary clean tech subsidiary to tackle industrial water pollution. Thorne read the release, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. The language was aggressive. It spoke of disrupting legacy industries and ending the era of environmental negligence. It announced the appointment of a new chief technology officer, a brilliant Columbia engineering scholar named Clara Hayes. The name hit him like a physical blow. Clara, the waitress. He stared at the name, then at the accompanying headshot. It was her. The same face, the same defiant eyes, but stripped of the servility of the uniform. In the photo, she looked poised, intelligent, and lethal. He scrolled down, his hands trembling. The release detailed the technology in broad but tantalizing strokes. A graphene-based filtration system capable of achieving near 100% molecular capture of industrial carcinogens. It was followed by a direct quote from Julian Croft. For too long, certain legacy industries have treated our planet like a personal sewer, passing the cost of their pollution on to future generations. That era is over. Helios Dynamics will not just set a new standard for environmental responsibility, it will prove that sustainable manufacturing is also the most profitable. We will be actively seeking partnerships with companies ready to embrace the future. Those who refuse will be left behind. It was a declaration of war. Thorne's phone began to ring. It didn't stop for the rest of the day. First, it was his head of R&D. Marcus, this Helios technology, if it's real, it makes our entire 5-year development plan obsolete. Graphene filtration on this scale? We thought it was decades away. Next, his largest institutional investor. Marcus, I'm looking at the Omnigen release. What the hell is going on? Is your tech portfolio exposed? We need assurances. Thorne Industries stock, which had stabilized, began to plummet. It dropped 10% in an hour, then 15%. Algorithmic traders, sensing blood in the water, began shorting the stock, accelerating the nosedive. The most damning call came from his chief legal counsel. Marcus, OmniGen just filed 3 provisional patents. The descriptions are broad, but they cover core processes related to polymer synthesis and wastewater discharge. It's a direct assault on our intellectual property, and they've hired Clara Hayes. Given the public incident, this looks retaliatory. It looks personal, and it makes her sympathetic to any jury. Thorne slammed the phone down, his face purple with rage. She's a waitress, a child. How could she do this? He was missing the point. It wasn't just her. It was Croft. Croft had taken her raw talent and given it the backing of a multi-billion-dollar war machine. The news cycle pivoted with dizzying speed. The story was no longer about a billionaire bullying a waitress. It was now a David and Goliath narrative, a modern-day corporate fairy tale. Waitress pushed into pool by industrialist titan, hired by rival billionaire to destroy. The months that followed were not a blitzkrieg but a siege, a grinding war fought not with armies but with subpoenas, algorithms, and whispers. Marcus Thorne, a king barricaded in a crumbling fortress, believed the world still operated on his terms. He unleashed his legal team, a pack of seasoned killers in $1,000 suits, with a single mandate: to bury Clara Hayes under the weight of the law. The deposition room was a beige, airless box designed to suffocate the soul. For 3 days, Clara sat at a polished table, its surface reflecting a distorted, elongated version of herself. Across from her, Thorne's lead counsel, a man named Sterling, circled like a patient shark. He never raised his voice. He used a soft, almost paternal tone that was more unnerving than any shout. "So, Ms. Hayes," Sterling began on the first day, steepling his fingers, "you contend that your remarkable invention was conceived entirely independently of any information gleaned during your employment at the Airy." "My research began in my sophomore year at Columbia," Clara stated, her voice a calm, level frequency in the dead air. "My lab notebooks, which have been submitted as evidence, are dated, witnessed, and detail a multi-year process of theoretical and experimental work. The technology is an extension of my thesis." "A thesis," Sterling mused, as if the word were a quaint artifact. "And you expect this panel to believe that a university student, working with a university budget, somehow out-innovated the multi-million-dollar research and development division of a global leader like Thorne Industries?" Clara felt a flicker of the old anger. It was the same condescension Thorne had shown her, just wrapped in legal jargon. But Julian's coaching had been relentless. "Answer the question asked, not the one he implies. Be a scientist. Data, not drama." "Innovation isn't a function of budget, Mr. Sterling. It's a function of perspective. Thorne Industries' R&D is focused on incremental improvements to a fundamentally flawed and outdated methodology. They're trying to build a faster horse. I was designing an engine." The words hung in the air. Julian's lawyers sitting beside her remained impassive, but she saw one of them jot down a note. For 3 days it continued. Sterling probed her finances, her grades, her social life, searching for a crack. He painted her as a radical, an opportunist, a spy. Through it all, Clara clung to the principles of science. She treated his questions like variables in a complex equation. She isolated them, defined their properties, and provided a precise, logical, and irrefutable answer. She refused to yield to emotional entropy. But the nights were different. In the sterile quiet of the corporate apartment OmniGen had provided, the composure would crumble. She'd stand in the shower, the water scalding hot, and feel the phantom weight of Sterling's questions, the exhaustion of maintaining a perfect, impenetrable facade. She'd stare at schematics on her laptop, but the numbers would blur. Doubt, a corrosive agent, would begin to eat at the edges of her resolve. Was she really capable of this? Had she started a war she had no hope of winning? On the second night, her phone buzzed. A text from Julian. It wasn't a message of encouragement. It was a satellite image of the Hudson River estuary with a single red dot marking the location of a Thorne Industries discharge pipe. Below it, a second image, a spectral analysis graph showing the concentration of carcinogenic polymers in the sediment. The caption simply read, "This is the data, the rest is noise." It was all she needed. He wasn't coddling her. He was reminding her of the mission, recalibrating her focus. He was treating her not as a victim to be protected, but as a soldier who needed ammunition. The noise faded. The data remained. The next morning, she walked back into the deposition room, not as a defendant, but as an expert witness for the prosecution of Marcus Thorne's entire legacy. While Clara held the legal line, Julian waged the real war. He understood that the modern battlefield was perception. He didn't counter Thorne's vicious, anonymously funded smear campaign, the articles painting Clara as his mistress, a corporate Matahari, with denials. Instead, he orchestrated a series of quiet, devastatingly effective countermoves. He leaked Helios Dynamics preliminary emissions data to a key environmental pack, which then published a comparative analysis showing Helios's process was not just cleaner, but 1,000 times cleaner than Thorne's. He funded 3 new STEM scholarships at Columbia in Clara Hayes' name, cementing her image as a brilliant scholar, not a schemer. He was a master of asymmetrical warfare. Thorne was using a battering ram, Julian was using neurotoxins. The culmination of Clara's work, the proof of concept, took place not in a boardroom, but in a stark, white laboratory in their new Brooklyn facility. The audience was a carefully selected group of industry analysts, skeptical journalists, and most importantly, the CEOs of 2 of Thorne's largest clients. Clara, dressed in a simple lab coat, stood before the prototype. It was an elegant cylinder of steel and woven graphene mesh, humming with a low, steady thrum. She didn't give a speech. She simply took a large beaker filled with a viscous, iridescently black sludge, a cocktail of chemicals sourced directly from a thorn-polluted tributary, and poured it into the intake valve. The silence in the room was absolute. They watched the sludge disappear. Seconds later, from a spigot on the other side, a stream of water began to flow. It was not just clear, it was crystalline. It caught the light and fractured it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It poured into a simple glass pitcher, looking as pure as glacial melt. Julian, who had been standing silently in the back, walked forward. He picked up the pitcher. He didn't offer it to the guests. He poured a single glass and looked at it, his expression unreadable. For a fleeting moment, Clara saw him not as the titan in the penthouse, but as the boy from Glen Lyon, Pennsylvania, staring at a river that had stolen his father's health. He was looking at a ghost. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he drank the water. He set the glass down with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. He looked at the assembled executives, his gaze hard as forged steel. "The era of externalized costs is over," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable finality. "This is the new price of doing business. You can either pay it or you can become a liability." It was not a sales pitch. It was a death sentence. Marcus Thorne watched the clip of the demonstration on a tablet in his office, the same office where he had once felt like the master of the universe. Now it felt like a mausoleum. He watched the black sludge become pure water. He watched Julian Croft drink it. He threw the tablet against the wall, where it shattered, the screen spiderwebbing into a mosaic of his failure. His company was bleeding out. Clients were invoking contract clauses to switch suppliers. His top engineers were being poached by Helios with offers he could no longer match. His stock was in free fall, a cascade failure he was powerless to stop. The world he had built, a world that bent to his will, his wealth, his name, had ceased to exist. He had been so confident in the old rules that money bought silence, that power was impunity, that he hadn't realized the game had changed. He was a dinosaur staring up at the meteor, still convinced of his own invincibility. The final blow came not from Wall Street or a rival corporation, but from a quiet, aging man in upstate New York. A former Thorne plant manager, his conscience gnawed raw by years of complicity and a recent grim diagnosis from his oncologist, had been following the news. He saw the video of Clara, the quiet dignity of her walk away from the pool. He read about the lawsuit. He saw the headshot of the brilliant young engineer and realized she was the living embodiment of the future his company had spent decades poisoning. He contacted the New York Times. The documents he provided were a Rosetta Stone of corporate malfeasance: 2 sets of books, falsified EPA reports, internal memos explicitly directing staff to dump pollutants under the cover of darkness. The resulting exposé was not just an article, it was an obituary. The Department of Justice, armed with an ironclad case, moved in. The dawn raid was a quiet, humiliating affair. There was no resistance. The empire was already hollowed out, a dead husk waiting for a final push. When the news of his indictment broke, Marcus Thorne was sitting alone by his infinity pool at the Eyrie, from which his ban had been quietly lifted in a desperate attempt by the restaurant's owners to distance themselves from the winning side. He stared at the water, glittering under the city lights. He thought of that night, of the girl's eyes. He had meant to show her the vast, unbridgeable chasm between their worlds. He had succeeded, but the chasm was the inverse of what he had imagined. He had not pushed her into the depths. He had pushed her into the sky, and she had pulled the entire world up with her, leaving him alone at the bottom. There was no victory party. When the guilty verdict on all 16 counts came down, Clara was in her office, staring at a complex fluid dynamics simulation on her screen. Julian was in his, 3 floors above. The news arrived as all news did now. A silent, sterile notification on a screen. A headline. Marcus Thorne found guilty. Faces up to 25 years in federal prison. She closed the notification window. The simulation continued to run, particles flowing, interacting, finding equilibrium. It felt quiet. The righteous fury that had fueled her for over a year had burned away, leaving behind not triumph, but a vast, calm emptiness. The dragon was slain. The quest was over. But she was no longer the girl who had started the journey. Later that evening, she found Julian on the observation deck of the Helios building. It was a clear, cold night, and the lights of Manhattan were spread out below them, a glittering neural network of human ambition. They stood in silence for a long time, the wind whipping around them. "I kept thinking I would feel something more," Clara said, her voice almost stolen by the wind. "Jubilation, relief, something. Instead, I just feel the silence." "Revenge is a noisy engine," Julian replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It deafens you. The silence is what comes after, when you can finally hear again." He turned to her, his face shadowed, his eyes reflecting the city lights. "The question is, what do you hear?" Clara thought about it. She heard the low hum of the servers in the lab, the quiet hiss of nitrogen lines, the distant rhythmic pulse of the reclamation facility down by the river. She heard the sound of her own work. "I hear the next problem," she said. "Thorne was never the real problem," Julian said. "He was a symptom, a particularly malignant one, but a symptom nonetheless. The disease is inefficiency, waste, the belief that progress must come at the cost of the future." He looked at her, and for the first time since they met, the analytical, calculating mask was entirely gone. In its place was a profound weariness, the look of a man who had been fighting the same war his entire life, since he was a boy watching his father gasp for air. "My father died believing that the world was built on a zero-sum game," he said softly. "For him to have a job, the river had to be sick. For the town to survive, the men had to die early. He accepted it. He thought it was the only way." He paused, the wind tugging at his coat. "What you've done, Clara, you've proven the premise is wrong. You've changed the equation." He wasn't congratulating her. He was thanking her. He was acknowledging that her intellect had achieved what his fortune and fury alone never could. It had not just vanquished an enemy, it had invalidated the philosophy that had created him. Clara thought of the diamond bracelet that had snagged on her cheap apron, an insult that had started it all. She thought of the pearls Julian had given her at the facility opening, a quiet symbol of her new station. But she realized now that neither defined her. They were just artifacts from a life she had already moved beyond. "The work isn't over," she said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. "The work is never over," Julian confirmed. He gestured out at the sprawling, incandescent city. "This entire system is a prototype. Inefficient energy grids, failing infrastructure, atmospheric carbon. It's all just a bigger version of the same polluted river. A poorly designed world." He didn't offer her a promotion or a bonus or another piece of jewelry. He offered her something far more valuable. He offered her the next problem, the bigger dragon. She looked out at the city, at the endless sea of lights. She no longer saw a treacherous landscape of egos and entitlement. She saw a system, a complex, deeply flawed, but beautiful system, filled with inefficiencies to be exploited, with problems waiting for a better design. Thorne had told her that people like him build the world, and people like her just clean it. He was wrong. The world wasn't a static monument to be cleaned. It was a dynamic equation waiting to be solved. And she was just beginning to write the proof. She felt the cold night air on her face, and for the first time in a very long time, it didn't feel like a shock. It felt like a beginning,